All right, so your bell ringer is done. So what are we going to do today? I can create and defend a proposal for reducing the environmental effects humans have on the earth. So we kind of touched on this last week when we were talking about those renewable and non-renewable resources. The renewable resources are typically going to be better for the environment, and the non-renewable resources are going to be harsher or not so good for the environment. So today, like it says, we're going to break down, what are we doing that is hurting the environment, and what can we do to change some of those things? So how can we fix the ways we have harmed the earth? Okay? So just like this says, there are certain things humans do that leave a negative effect on the environment, like we just said. And remember, I know we talked about how non-renewable is harsher, but don't forget that we tend to use more of the non-renewable resources because they are usually a little bit easier to come by and they're cheaper. They're cheaper to use. Using renewable resources is kind of expensive sometimes, so we just stick with the non-renewables. Now, as Earth's population keeps growing and growing, more and more non-renewable resources are being used up. So maybe you've heard of this before, maybe not. Earth's population, so the amount of people living on Earth, keeps multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. Because think about it. Your parents had a handful of kids, and then each of their kids someday might also have a handful of kids, and that's happening to families and families and families all over the place. So the amount of humans on Earth just keeps adding up. We're making more humans than, this is going to sound morbid, than we're getting rid of, right? More people are being born than are dying at a faster rate. So since the population keeps going up, the amount of non-renewable resources that we're using keeps increasing too, because there's more people. So we need more gases to heat our homes or to fuel our cars, whatever. So we keep using more and more non-renewable resources, which, as we know, not great for the environment, right? Now, here's a term you've probably heard before: pollution. Pollution. This is when the environment, so it can be either the air or water or soil, anything in the environment is contaminated, which is just a fancy way of saying it's dirty, so it gets dirtier. And this is going to be by waste or chemicals or any other type of harmful substance. So when we burn those fossil fuels, which is, remember, that's our oil, our coal, our natural gas, when we burn those fossil fuels, it tends to release, in this smoke, see right here, it tends to release certain chemicals that are going to pollute the air, so cause the air to become dirty or contaminated. Now the main thing, and you've probably heard of this before in the news or in another science class, this is a hot topic, burning those fossil fuels will also release what we call carbon dioxide, or you might see it as CO2. So it's a type of chemical compound. So once you burn these fossil fuels, it's going to release that CO2, that carbon dioxide, into the air, which increases something we call the greenhouse effect. Okay, so this is a lot to take in. I understand this slide's going to be like a whole lot. So fossil fuels, we're burning them. It releases carbon dioxide, which increases what we call the greenhouse effect. Now, what is the greenhouse effect? That sounds super complicated. It ain't. The greenhouse effect is this natural process that will occur when certain gases in the atmosphere, so outside of the Earth, we have this we're just going to call it a space full of air. You don't need to know much more than that, but the atmosphere, it's going to, certain gases in the atmosphere are going to be absorbed from the sun, and the sun is going to radiate those chemicals back, okay? So the sun is going to absorb what's in the atmosphere and radiate it back toward the Earth. So since more carbon dioxide is being released, it is increasing the effect that the sun has on absorbing heat and sending it back. So again, since more carbon dioxide is in the air, the sun is absorbing more and absorbing more heat, and it's throwing more heat back at the Earth. So that is that greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect happens all the time, but the increase in the carbon dioxide is making the greenhouse effect happen more strongly. So we're getting a lot more heat thrown back to the planet. So this is the part I know you've heard of. When that greenhouse effect does increase and a lot more heat is being thrown back at the planet, this is what causes what you've heard of that is called global warming. Because the globe is being warmed up because we're having more heat from the sun thrown back at us, being radiated back at us. So we don't really call it global warming too much anymore. Now we start calling it more climate change. And that's because we stuck with global warming in the beginning, because global warming is when we're just talking about the Earth's average surface temperature is being heated, which is exactly what's happening because of that greenhouse effect. We have more heat. But this can cause, the term global warming can be misleading, because when we talk about how the surface temperature of the Earth, how it keeps raising, that has different effects on different parts of the planet. So while the overall average temperature is raising, you're going to see different effects, not necessarily just a temperature raise in different parts of the world. So that's why we stick with climate change, because the climate is the weather that's typically going to happen in an area. So like the Mississippi climate, it's hot and muggy in the summer, and then in the winter it gets colder. It doesn't snow too much, but it snows every once in a while. Like that's our climate, right? So over time, this greenhouse effect increasing is causing climates of certain areas in the world to change. Okay, and this here is just a map of the increase in surface temperature of the globe. It's actually not that dramatic of an increase in the average temperature. And down here's the year, here's the temperature. It's not that big of a change, so you might think, who cares? How can that have an effect on anything? But the Earth, she's super dramatic. She's super temperamental. She doesn't like anything to change. It has to be just right, because when you change even just 0.2 or 0.4 of a degree, she freaks out and crazy things start happening. So because of this climate change, we've seen an increase in storms and hurricanes. This is the picture for climate change that they love to show off. Up at the ends of the globe, like in the North Pole and the South Pole, a lot of the ice is melting. So a lot of the homes where the polar bears live are starting to fade away. So that's causing obvious problems for the polar bears or other things living in the North Pole. And then those forest fires that we were talking about, that especially the ones that happened in 2020, especially the ones in Australia that happened naturally, that increase in temperature is increasing things such as forest fires. So all those animals' habitats are being destroyed, people's homes are being destroyed. It's because of this climate change. So I started off with the biggie, okay? So this is two complicated things that still some adults struggle to fully understand. This is as much detail you need to know about it. So if you're confused on it, hit me up. I can walk you through it. I know it's kind of a lot to grasp, okay? But like I said, I wanted to start with the doozy, the big way that humans are impacting our environment, which is that burning of the fossil fuels, which is causing this climate change to occur. So with each of the impacts, we're going to talk about, okay, so it's not just all gloom and doom. We're not just going to say, well, we screwed up the earth, it's over with. We're going to talk about what can we do, meaning us as people on the earth as a whole altogether, and then what can you yourself specifically do, okay? So for the we do, this is stuff that you individually can't do. So for this first one, it says pass laws that control the amount of carbon dioxide emissions or released into the air. I'm assuming none of you work for the United States government or any type of foreign government. That's why I said you yourself can't do this right now. But we actually just joined back into what's called the Paris Climate Agreement, which is an agreement with a lot of countries around the world agreeing that, okay, we're only going to burn a certain amount of fossil fuels, so only a certain amount of carbon dioxide is going to go into the air. And then, of course, as a country, we can start to use more renewable energy resources. Well, what can you do, right? What can you do? So what you can do is walk. I know some of us are starting to drive, but if you use less gas, because even when you drive your car, I mean, think about, you know, when out of the back of your car you've got a lot of smoke, that's carbon dioxide. So you can walk instead of using the car if you're going a short distance. Obviously, I don't expect you to walk from Como to Sardis. That's too much. You can control how much electricity you use in your house because that's also going to use up more of those fossil fuels. And also, you can vote. I know we're too young to vote right now, and maybe you haven't thought about this, but in the next presidential election, a lot of you are going to be voting on that. Crazy, that happens so fast. But a lot of politicians have a lot to do with these rules over here that we talk about. So you actually deciding, okay, who's going to make these decisions about our Earth? That's up to you, really. Okay, like I said, that was a biggie. That was a biggie. So these next ones aren't going to be nearly as much as a doozy, so don't you worry. So what is another way that humans are impacting the Earth? This is something that we call deforestation. Deforestation. So this is just the removal of large areas of forests for human purposes, okay? So think forest, the word forest is in there, and de means that you're taking away. So we're taking away parts of the forest. So like here, we've got a large amount of woods, and we chopped all of this down. Okay, we chopped all of this down. Now for what? So we usually use this either A, to make room for more cities. So if we want to build a new town or add in extra buildings, we'll chop down a forest. Or if we want to use this wood right here for either furniture, to make more furniture, or use the wood for any type of construction, or a number of things you can chop down forest for. So this isn't going to be great because trees hold a lot of that carbon dioxide we talked about inside of them. Don't need to know more details than that. Just know that trees hold in that carbon dioxide. So when you chop them down, it actually releases the carbon dioxide into the air, which we know isn't good because that increases that greenhouse effect, which heats up the earth. And it's also not so great for the soil. So whenever you chop down a tree, the soil doesn't do too well. Again, you don't need to know the details of why that happens. Just know it's not great for the soil. Okay, so what can we do about it? We need trees though, so like what are we gonna do? Well, the one thing that we can do is that reforestation. So that's pretty easy. Deforestation, you're taking down the forest. Reforestation, you're building up a new forest. So you are going to be planting those trees and replacing the ones that have been cut down before. So like think about this area. Okay, you cut down all these. If you planted a new forest here, which takes some time, but if you planted a new forest here, that's reforestation. Or in your urban communities, urban means like the city, where rural is really more where we are, where it's more like farmland. Urban, in the cities, you can have more green space, meaning more space where you're not chopping down as many trees. If you know Shelby Farms outside of Mississippi, that's like a big park. Or outside of Mississippi, outside of Memphis, it's that big park with like a lot of walking trails. But there's a lot of wooded area that is in the middle of the city, but they aren't chopping any of it down. They're keeping it the way that it is. So that's going to keep deforestation from happening because the city owns it. They're not going to chop it down. So what can you do specifically? Reduce, reuse, recycle. We've heard that before. Reduce just means use less things, especially like paper or anything made out of trees. So less trees are going to be needed to be chopped down. Same thing with reusing. You're just using something else instead of buying something new, using something that somebody else has owned. And recycling. So don't throw away your stuff, recycle it. Which in Mississippi, we don't have a ton of recycling, which we're going to talk about tomorrow, but yeah, you can do all of those. Or just use old furniture. So like right here, you don't need to buy a new table. You can make your own table. I know the table is kind of an ugly example, but that's something that you can do to avoid all those trees from being chopped down. Okay, we got two more, but it's on one slide because they're kind of similar, kind of not. So first over here, we have mining. So again, mining, this is something else that humans do on a daily basis that is not good for the environment. Mining is how we remove those rocks and minerals from the ground. So this is like, I believe this is a coal mine. So this is how you get the coal out of the ground. You have to mine the oil and gas from outside of the ground. So this is what it typically looks like. So obviously we are disturbing some habitats. If this is where some animals lived, can't live there no mo. Also, does really bad things to the soil and to the rocks where the mining took place. Obviously changes the landscape. That's not natural looking. And if it rains a lot and runoff happens, so that extra water goes towards a big waterway, that runoff can take any bad chemicals in this and pollute or dirty waterways. So, not so great. Over here, I know we've heard of this one. This is a landfill. So this is just an area where your trash is stored and burned, because when you throw your trash away, it's got to go somewhere, right? So they take it to the dump or landfill and they pile it up until they have to either bury it or burn it. So not great. So when it is burned, it is releasing greenhouse gases, which is carbon dioxide, which increases that greenhouse effect, which again heats up the earth, so that's not good. When you burn trash, it also dirties the air, and again, same thing with the mining. When it rains, it can take all of that gross pollution, bad chemicals in the garbage, and pollute waterways. And I don't know about y'all, but I don't want to drink garbage water. So, not great. Okay, so what can we do about mining and landfills? Like, what control do we have over that? Well, for mining specifically, there's something called reclamation. So that's just a fancy way of saying, okay, we're restoring land that was disturbed by mining. So they take, like, especially this is a better picture where there's that big hole and it's all cut out. They fill it in and they'll just plant some grass over it. This, not to state my own opinion, but this doesn't work 100% of the time. Typically, mining companies tend to say that it works better than it really does, because you've already disturbed all of the soil in here, so you can't really fix that too much. Any habitat that was there, it's pretty much gone, and by the time they fill in all these holes, the pollution has already happened. So the waterways are already polluted, they're already dirtied, and that's very hard to bounce back from. So this isn't fantastic. And often the machines they use for the mining, it depends what type of mining it is, so don't say this is 100%. It depends on the type of mining, and it depends where you are, and depends on the type of machine. But I know there are some mining companies that to actually move their machines from mine to mine, it's too much, so they just bury it in with this whole reclamation process. So that is obviously not good for the soil either. So it kind of works, kind of doesn't. But a big thing we can do, and do all the time, is protect the land from being used for mining at all, and that's really your national parks. So those are those specific places around the United States that the government decided this place is too dang pretty, we can't touch it. So having more space that's protected and can't be touched or mined like this, that's exactly what we can do. But you specifically, again, this is more for the trash, the reduce, reuse, recycle. Have less things be thrown away and have more things be reused. And then, of course, once again, I put this on all of them, vote for people who support the renewable energy sources or support reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And I also added run for office, because if nobody that you like is on the ballot someday, I know you can't right now, just do it yourself. Be your own politician. That's how life works, right? Okay, so I know that was a doozy, but we got through it. So again, just let this soak in your little brain. Hopefully it's not all too gloom and doom. I know I talked about the earth heating up and all these crazy bad things happening to the environment, but there's a lot of good things that we can do instead, and there's actions we can take immediately that's going to make everything at least a little bit better. So if you have any questions about it, hit me up. If not, we're going to practice all of this tomorrow.